Hello, everyone. It is Saturday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. I'm Chris Weuve. This is Starfleet Tactical, and I have with me one Christopher Carlson, U.S. Navy retired, who still seems to be having network issues. Chris, you're still freezing a lot. Oh, well, we will press ahead. Chris will be slightly jerky for the remainder of this show, but we'll make it work. Lissa threw up. Lissa's behind the scenes. She just threw up we do not speak for any employer, past, present, or future. Hello, Lissa. I certainly do not speak for any employer, past, present. Who knows about future? Maybe I will get an employer that puts me in charge of being the person to have all the thoughts about space war and science fiction and stuff like that. I should be so lucky. So hello to everybody in the audience. Chris, anything before we jump in? Any opening thoughts?
Typing is a problem.
Yes, and he's talking about ship typing, like declaring something as a destroyer versus a cruiser. That is what he means by typing. And yes, it is a problem. And we're going to talk about that. So I put together some slides, as I always do. So let me go ahead and launch those. And so I put this as frigates and battleships in the news because, of course, there's been all sorts of interesting things that have happened the last couple of weeks with the Constellation class frigate being canceled by the Navy, and a declaration that they're going to take the national security cutter and just buy those instead, and the declaration that we're now going to build something that they're calling a battleship. And we can have the conversation about is the thing they canceled really a frigate, and is the thing that they're building really a battleship? And all of those are interesting questions. But a lot of it comes down to there's various different counting rules on how you do all this stuff. To give you a little bit of a preview of my position on this, my position is generally like there is no absolute truth in this regard. People just make up systems, make up a system and run with it. Especially if you're a science fiction person trying to create a system, create whatever system you want. That's perfectly fine. You don't even have to be consistent, because we've proven in the real world that the real world isn't consistent about this stuff. So, but before we get into the meat of it, so here, let's talk about a few announcements. So this is what we've got in the queue. And I'd like to point out a couple of things, three things in particular. The first is, notice that next week is I'm not going to be here, and the week after that is labeled special. I'll explain what that means in a moment. After that, on the 24th and the 31st, my expectation is I will do a show on one of those two weekends, but probably not both, but maybe both, depending upon the weather, because I'm going to try to go visit the Weuve Strategic Book and Game Reserve located at Beaver Valley Self-Storage in Beaver Valley, Ohio, which means that I will be out of town for that weekend. And I will be out of town next weekend also. I'm also going to the storage facility, but more importantly, I'm going to a party on Saturday night, and it's a party that's 3 hours away. So as long as I'm going 3 hours in the direction of my storage unit, I might as well just go ahead and go all the way to my storage unit. So that's what I'm going to do. You'll also notice down at the bottom, I've made an explicit edition of the Exordium read-along. And for those who haven't heard me talk about this recently, Exordium is my all-time favorite science fiction series. It's done by Sherwood Smith and Dave Trowbridge. It first came out in the 1990s. There was a second edition that was done about 15 years ago now, thereabouts. They did like a very, very heavy rewrite. Well, I hear from Sherwood that they are planning to do a relaunch of the Exordium series. I do not know what that means. I haven't yet had an opportunity to call Sherwood and say, hey, tell me more about this relaunch. But I figured that it probably makes sense. If the relaunch is a third edition, if they're going to put the hood up and sort of polish it some more, then the read along will be the 3rd edition. If not, it'll be the 2nd edition. I'll let you know what I think that is going to be the case with that. But Exordium is my all-time favorite series for a lot of reasons, and part of it is it's got some really cool space battle stuff in it. And I like the ship design stuff, and my game design partner, Arius Kaufman, and I had designed a game set in this universe that played really well, but it sort of got caught in the gears of the agents of their agent and stuff like that. That agent is long out of the picture, but we lost whatever momentum we had. And it's something that I'd like to restart. Now, I do owe somebody else a game first. Yeah, he's being very coy about that. I do own Chris and Larry Bond a game first, and so that's going to happen first. In fact, I've always told people that I've been putting off starting the Exordium reread because I knew that it would distract me once I started that. So I still want to get the game for Chris and Larry done, and you know I've completed my move. I've started my new job. Things are kind of settling down a little bit. So hopefully I can do that sooner rather than later. Although I've pointed out in the past that every time I've sat down to do it, I've ended up in the hospital. So let's hope that this time that doesn't happen.
The things you do to get out of a game.
Yeah. It was really impressive the way I managed to arrange a critical bleeding incident. Be careful of blood thinners, people. Be careful of blood thinners. When you read the list of things where it says that you can just randomly start bleeding, they mean it. Mm-hmm. They mean it. It was bad. But longtime viewers of the show know all about this because I basically was out of commission for 6 weeks as a result of that. Maybe even longer than that, because it was really bad. So in any event, that's what's going on with the announcement slide. So, okay, so what do I mean about the 17th of January? Well, 17th of January is going to be special because this show is going to be cross-listed with an event in the Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention. So what is the Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention? Well, there's this organization known as the, wait for it, Armchair Dragoons. That is a board and wargaming organization. It's primarily like traditional wargaming organization. It's run by a guy named Brant Guillory, who helps me with the Connections Online conference I do in April. And so he asked if I would do a session for the digital convention, and I said sure. But he wanted me to do it on Saturday, and I said, hey, I already do something on Saturday night. Can we cross-list it and do it as both? And so the plan is we're going to try to cross-list it and do it as both. Spent some time talking with Alyssa about the technical aspects of it, and we're going to I think the plan is to try to do it using this StreamYard account, and so nothing will change in that regard. There is an offhand possibility that if things get too hard, I may post a thing saying, hey, we're going to be on this other channel for this time. But the default plan is it will be on the Armchair Dragoons channel, and it will also be on the regular Aries Studio channel. So I will figure out how to do that sometime in the next 2 weeks. I will put together my talk. I said I would do an intro to sort of space warfare, and it's more navies and Traveler and how that stuff works, and do sort of the overview thing. You will all recall that I am a member of the Martin Doherty Cult of the Personality, who he does a lot of the Navy stuff in Traveler, and he's got about 5 or 6 books out now, and I've had on my list of things to do. In fact, if we go back, Traveler is one of the things on that list, and it's going to require a lot of reading. But I'm just going to do sort of the entry-level overview thing that sort of is the scene setter for it, which is it's basically the first episode in that series anyway. The only difference is I thought I was going to do a first episode and then immediately do a second, third, and fourth, and fifth. Instead, I'm going to do a first episode, and then there's going to be a break for some period of time until I get around to doing the second episode. So, but at least I'll have something to point back. Registration for the Armchair Dragoons digital convention is $4. It gets you into all of the events of the weekend. More importantly, it gets you into the Discord stuff. You can get to, I think, all the events on YouTube. You certainly will be able to get this one on YouTube. But it does give you access to the Discord server so you can hang out with other gamers. And while I'm at it, and I'm mentioning stuff with the Armchair Dragoons, I should mention Connections Online, which is a professional wargaming conference that I run in April. The topic this year is wargaming soft factors. And Brant is my sturdy right arm who makes the conference happen. It would not happen without the assistance of Brant. And as a sturdy left arm, this time around, Alyssa's going to help us out with a bunch of the video production stuff, because one of our video production people is going to be unavailable this year. And so we've, in the past, Alyssa has come and helped out with it. And Alyssa's always a joy to work with. So I'm looking forward to that. Okay, so on we go. So here's the general agenda. Let's talk a little bit about naming and typing. There's a few thoughts there. Then we're going to talk about what happened with the frigate. Then we're going to talk about BBGX. And there's a few extra slides after that, but it basically boils down to three sort of big picture pieces here. I wanted to sort of resync people on what we mean by naming and typing. And you may recall from me talking in the past that Chris Carlson and I both worked at the Defense Intelligence Agency in what eventually became the Defense Technology and Long Range Analysis Office, although it had a different name when Chris was there. And so as a result of that, we were both Navy guys. What was that?
3 different names.
3 different names. Yeah. In fact, I don't know if I told you this, but at one point they were talking about changing the name yet again. And one of the old timers, I forget who it was, but one of the old timers sent a note around that said, because they had said, hey, what do you we're thinking about changing the name of the office, and we're soliciting for examples or for ideas. And one of the old timers sent a thing that said, here are the last 8 names that have been used for this office. Any one of them would work. We may still have stationary.
Nice.
But Chris and I were both Navy people. We were both at one point or another chair of the Naval Weapons Systems Subcommittee of the Weapons and Space Intelligence Committee. So the WSIC, NWSS and the WSIC. NWSS was responsible for bringing everybody together to vote on naming and typing actions. And so why is the submarine, why do the Chinese have something that we call the Shang class submarine? Well, because O&I made a proposal that we call this thing the Shang, and the NWSS voted on that proposal, and therefore it is known as the Shang. And we coordinated with our foreign allies to do that, and that's how that works. And so at one point, at least in theory, I ran that process for the United States of America. And at least in theory, at one point, Chris ran that process. And so we've been up to our eyeballs in naming and typing over the years. And we're going to talk a little bit about that right now. Okay, so the bottom line up front that I would argue is that it's whatever you want it to be. Don't get hung up on things like, but that's not really a frigate. Because a frigate is whatever the owners of the frigate say that a frigate is. And if they try to put together a system that actually has some rationale behind it, so that if you see something called a frigate, you know what that means and maybe what its mission is, hey, that's great. But empirically, most powers will frequently do instances where they just don't do that. And as a practical matter, you're not likely to do it about your stuff. Your intel people might impose rationality on the other guy's stuff. but they don't have the authority to impose rationality on your stuff. So for instance, the Office of Naval Intelligence has a set of standards in a book called the GINTS, which I can never remember what it stands for.
Glossary of Naval Ship Types.
Yeah, I always forget the word glossary. Glossary of Naval Ship Types. And it is basically, it gives the list of the approved ship types that the Office of Naval Intelligence uses to describe other people's ships. It does not include U.S. Navy ships. The United States Navy, according to, if you use the O&I standards, the United States Navy has exactly 3 attack subs. Because most of the submarines that that the United States Navy calls attack subs, the Office of Naval Intelligence would call SSGNs, guided missile submarines, which does not mean that they can't shoot torpedoes. It just means they have a bunch of missile tubes. And so, like, for instance, the Chinese call the Type 055 a destroyer. The Office of Naval Intelligence calls it a cruiser because it's big. And oh, by the way, Chris, what do you think of the Type 55? What's your opinion of the Type 55?
Nice setup, sir.
So I
think the words you're looking for, it's either the best or second best destroyer, depending on how you do the accounting.
Yes, those are exactly the words I'm looking for. So what Chris is referring to there is that when we get down to the BBGX section of this talk, Perun, who, if you're not watching Perun, Perun, if you're not watching Perun for naval stuff, you should be. He's really, really good. He's a defense economist who does requirement sort of stuff for the Aussies. And I was making the comment I was making the comment to a mutual friend of ours from DIA earlier today that when Perun is talking about stuff that is my Jeopardy category, the worst rating I've ever gave him is like an A- or a B+ on some of the esoteric stuff, because he's more of a requirements person than he is a doctrine person. And sometimes we see that all the time. Like Drakhinifel is really good when he's talking about engineering stuff and sort of the mechanics of the engineering stuff, but he's not a naval architect and he's not a doctrine person. Alexander Clark is the same way. He's really good on the history. He's not a doctrine person. And so sometimes when people start talking about how you employ systems, there's a few things here and there where they drop the ball. But in the latest Perun, he did quote Chris about the Type 55, which O&I calls a cruiser because it's relatively big, and they call a destroyer. So I've talked a lot about various typing stuff in the past. It's never consistent across states. You know, everybody has their own system. It's frequently not consistent within a state. And I would argue, for instance, that the United States has had 4 typing conventions and even more naming conventions in just the last 100 years. We started off in the 20s through the 40s with some treaty definitions that were kind of based on historical functional usage, which is kind of weird because we're talking about historical functional usage for ship types that have only been around for about 20 years, if that. In the 1950s, we kind of defaulted to classifying stuff by size. In the 1970s, we went to functions. Cruisers did air defense, destroyers did sonar, did anti-submarine warfare. And that worked just fine until the Arleigh Burke class air defense destroyer came along. And now we kind of are back to doing it by size. And the only time we ever said, you know, sound the trumpets, we're adopting a new system was in 1975. All the other times, we just sort of backed into it. Sometimes we would have like, oh, we used to call this a destroyer leader, we're now going to call it a that. But most of the time it's not a consistently applied thing where we make the change across the board. It just happens as new ships come out. Chris, would you argue with any of that?
Well, within the U.S., no.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just talking about the U.S. there. I'm using the U.S.
The
as an
U.S. Navy is a very political creature,
yes.
and designations are a way of scratching whatever political itch you may have at the time, particularly if it makes it easier to get funding.
Yes, as witnessed by the fact that at one point they were going to be Ticonderoga class guided missile destroyers, and so that 1970s function thing, or it was actually the 1980s. This we're going to center on function. That was kind of, at least at that point, it was an accident. We were going to call them guided missile destroyers, but Congress was worried that we didn't have enough cruisers, so we said, okay, we'll call them cruisers. Problem solved.
There was also an issue on size. The size of the Tychos grew.
Yeah.
As you're well aware, the design does. And when you tip over 10,000 tons full load, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to call that a cruiser. And in fact, the Burkes were initially going to be cruisers.
Yeah.
But were scaled down to destroyers because that's what got the funding.
Yeah. And, we've had there have been the opposite happening in the Royal Navy, where on occasion the Royal Navy has purposefully called something smaller than it would be rather than bigger than it would be, just because it played better with the beam counters. Oh, we're not even building a cruiser. We're just building a destroyer. It's like, okay, but it's cruiser size. But hey, don't look behind the curtain. So, and all the missions have changed over time also. So, I mean, it's not like it used to be that ships had to sort of be one-trick ponies, because there was a time period where even if you had ships that could do more than one warfare area, if they switched warfare areas, they had to basically reload all their computer software for the new warfare area. And that caused problems. These days, everything is really multi-mission. So I think naming and typing stuff, the typing piece of that is the most important part, is that if you're designing a typing system, it should allow you to communicate to people. And, I put this in the same category as I do the definition of wargaming. It's all about being able to say, well, when I use that word, this is what I mean by it. It's about promoting communication. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about history in this regard. Because back in the times of the Age of Sail, so now we're going to talk about Royal Navy system stuff, the Royal Navy's various systems. Back in the Age of Sail, they used a typing system that was based on basically the number of decks and the number of guns. And so you might have something that would be a third rate, and that was based upon the number of guns, and number of decks and number of guns are not unrelated. And the size of the guns, you'd say, well, what about the size of the guns? Well, as a general rule, the more decks you had, the bigger the guns you had too. And so there's lots of correlation there. So it's not an n by n grid where every option is a possibility. It's only some of the cells in that n by n grid would actually have things in it. But by and large, it sort of breaks down that you can sort of think of it in that way. There's not a whole lot of overlap. It really is kind of the point where you get to this point, it now becomes something else. And that something else was the difference between a ship of the line and a frigate. And that system totally broke down because back in the day, the definition of a frigate was that it had one deck. One gun deck. And so this is how in 1860, when the Royal Navy put out HMS Warrior, the most powerful warship in the world was a frigate. Because it only had one deck, so they called it a frigate. And then they realized that that was absolutely insane. And they said, okay, maybe the system doesn't work anymore and we need a new system. And so you get through the churn of the late 1800s, a lot of churn in the 1800s. And we talk about things like pre-dreadnoughts, but no ship when it was built was ever called a pre-dreadnought, with the possible exception of the last one or two that came off the ways. Because, of course, you can't be a pre-dreadnought without the dreadnought. And so they were just battleships. And you had armored cruisers and protected cruisers and unarmored cruisers and the whole bit. And at some point, I'm going to go through all that stuff because I do want to do the history of the individual ship types. And I've already resigned myself to the fact that if I work really hard, I might be able to keep cruisers down to 3 episodes, because cruisers is just this morass of different cruiser types and different armor schemes and all the rest of it.
Yeah, but when you look at the function of a cruiser, it was scouting.
Yes, by and large, yes.
Yep.
Although,
and the battleship was a line of battleship.
yes, that is where the term comes from. But, that is when you talk about the battle fleet. But, we sent cruisers out to do, everybody sent cruisers out to do stuff. It wasn't unusual for the beefiest ship on a remote station to be an armored cruiser, or maybe even a protected cruiser.
And frigates in the age of sail were largely escorts.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Frigates in the age of sail were largely escorts or counter piracy.
No. Escort is not a word I would use back then. As
a general, may not be the word.
Well, except escort is really kind of a thing that is a 20th century creation when you start talking about spreading out the battle force by taking some of the capability off the big ships and putting them on smaller ships. Like during the age of sail, you would never think about, well, I've got these line of battleships, but I don't have any frigates to go along with it. Who needs frigates?
I was referring more to mercantile functions.
Yeah, and you could use them for that because people have this tendency of thinking of pirates as having battleships. They didn't. A line of battleships. They didn't. The pirate ships, as a general rule, were pretty underarmed compared to a real honest-to-goodness warship. So you could use frigates to escort things like that. As a general rule, though, the pirates you were worried about usually had the flag of your opponent flying from them, the Jolly Roger. And so, the Brits weren't really spending a whole lot of time escorting ships against pirates, because any ship that the Royal Navy cared about enough to put in a convoy had enough guns to probably fight off a pirate, right? Because merchant ships did carry guns. The things that you're worried about in that case were not like the Spanish were worried about Royal Navy ships going after the treasure fleet or French ships going after the treasure fleet. They weren't worried about pirates going after the treasure fleet. So in that case, you're probably dealing with bigger things. But as with everything else, the farther you get away from the power centers of Europe, the more and more these rules kind of fray at the edges, right? You get far enough away and who knows what you're going to find. It's also worth pointing out, and I did a show or two on this, that when you get to the Washington Naval Treaty and the London Naval Treaty, they had this incredibly distorting influence on ship typing. And so for instance, what a light cruiser was in 1915 and what you meant by light cruiser in 1935 were two dramatically different things. They are totally and completely unrelated to each other over the course of only 20 years. And that's because light cruiser was something that was defined in the London Naval Treaty of 1930. And there was a very specific definition about what a light cruiser was. And it wasn't the thing that was in the Washington, or that was pre-Washington Naval Treaty back in World War I. So, any thoughts before I go on, Chris?
Nope.
Okay, so what about science fiction? Well, a lot of these I've talked about, almost all of these I've talked about, except for the second one. In FAAACE's Renegade Legion universe, typing it's strictly based on two factors. The first one is the size. So if it's such and such a size, it's a frigate. If it's the next size up, it's a destroyer. And the other thing is whether it's a carrier or not. And a carrier has more carried craft and doesn't have a spinal mount. So all these things have a spinal mounted mass driver that can throw a big chunk of metal as a default. But some ships put more fighters and more carried craft on board and don't have this big spinal mount in the center of the ship that the ship is built around. And those are the two things that determine naming and typing in that, or typing in that universe. In SPI's Universe RPG, which also had a board game associated with it called Delta V, the ships are characterized by the number of pods they carry, because basically you've got a ship hull and they carry a certain number of pods, and the pods have different capabilities, and some of them are basically carried craft that can be dumped out, and some of them are weapons pods, and some of them are cargo pods. So you could have a hull that has 10 pods, and of which 2 are guns, and you could have a hull that has 3 pods, of which 2 are guns. And you can imagine adding other elements to this, like you can imagine that there might be some descriptor based upon the number of weapons or some sort of weapon score. And so you could end up with like a 10-pod destroyer versus a 10-pod battleship or something like that. But they didn't actually go that far in SPI's universe. In the Honor Harrington series, you've got the weirdness of Manticore bases their type on function, and Haven bases their type on size. And so by the end of the war between the two, Manticore and destroyers are twice the size of the Havenite destroyers, because Manticore says we're using these for destroyer roles, so we're going to call them destroyers. Whereas in Haven, they'd say that same ship is a cruiser. Star Trek is a mess. Canon sources are a mess. Non-canon sources are a mess. Some of the sources, including the original series and FAAACE, seem to base their system off a contemporary United States Navy. The Constitution class is listed in sources that are canon or as close to canon as you can get as being a heavy cruiser. Klingon D7 is listed as a battle cruiser, for instance. TNG seems to have its own system, and every fan product out there, every RPG out there seems to make up their own system. Some of them are quite good. Like, I like the idea of perimeter action ships from the Mastercom data center stuff. The Mastercom data center stuff is really pretty good. Some of it's not good. There's somebody did a fan-based supplement for the FAAACE game that, as near as I can tell, they just took every idea that anybody had posted to a web forum and included it as a separate ship type. And so literally you ended up with like 10 different types of cruisers and 10 different types of destroyers. And even if they were discernible, because most of them just sort of said, and there's special gear to do the particular mission, which was generally pretty ill-defined. A lot of the missions didn't make sense. Like, why would you optimize a ship to do that? You know, this ship is optimized for single combat with one pass only and then flee away. I'm going to build this ship to do that? That doesn't make any sense to me. I might say that that's part of the requirements that I'm going to use, but I wouldn't build a ship to do that. So I just realized I probably should have included Starfleet Battles in this, Chris, but my guess is Starfleet Battles is contemporary USN, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's just pretend I did include it. Okay, so let's talk about the cancellation of the Constellation class. Perun referred to it, I think, as the cancellation class frigate, which I thought was really funny. They're going to build 2, and then they're going to stop. It's been running behind schedule, and it's been running over budget, and I don't have a good feel as to why. I've heard things, I have theories. It's easy to look at it and say mission creep. In fact, this is the first reason why I specifically wanted to have a naming and typing discussion beforehand, because a lot of people have said, well, it's not really a frigate. And I think the Navy would say, yeah, a frigate is just something that we use to describe things that are smaller than destroyers. We don't really think of it as being a frigate mission. It's from what I've seen, what they wanted to get was 2/3 of the capability of a Burke at about half the cost. And I think what they're in danger of getting is less than 2/3 of the capability at about 80% of the cost, which is why they decided it wasn't worth it. I've also heard indications that there were some serious problems in the shipyard. In fact, I know at least one person that pointed a finger and said, yeah, this time it's not the Navy's fault. This time it's the shipyard's fault. As a long-time codependent of the United States Navy, I've been in an abusive relationship with the United States Navy for 20-some years. As a longtime watcher of the United States Navy, I find it hard to believe that it isn't at least partially the Navy's fault. What have you heard, Chris? Do you have any special insight on this?
The few things I've heard is, yes, the shipyard basically fell on its sword. The Navy is very much responsible because, one, they let the shipyard get away with it. They didn't call on it. And 2, the Navy put out for a proven design, which they then proceeded to change.
This is actually why I'm not. The Navy said they were going to do that all along.
Yes.
This time they said that. This time they said, this is where we're starting. We're going to make a bunch of changes to it. Now, you can make changes in a good way and you can make changes in a bad way. And I don't have any insight as to whether they did it in a good way or a bad way. The bad way is to never be able to make up your mind and constantly changing things that you've already changed previously, which is what they did with LCS. But the impression I got was not that they did that in this case. They may have underestimated the effects of the changes they wanted to make.
Which wouldn't surprise me. But the other thing is that a lot of these frigates built in Europe are now being built to a hybrid military civilian standard. And NAVC has yet to be able to accept that. And particularly after all the stuff they got from LCS, they're running a little bit scared on survivability issues. So you end up changing a lot more than just which engine you're going to use or where the VLS is going to go. You're changing whole compartmentation, whole structure.
Yeah, and at that point, it's not the same ship. At that point, you might as well start with a clean design.
And because you're now undoing what was done, you then have to go back to square one for each compartment you change, which is more time, more money.
Yep. And I saw at least one person who suggested they should cancel this and buy some foreign cutters instead, to which my response was, if you're going to buy a foreign ship, just buy 2 damn frigates. Just go to the Italians and buy FREMs from the Italians, or have Fincantieri US build the straight up design without making any changes, because they've doubled the cost of the ship. You can get 2 ships for the price. You could get 2 frigates for the price of one Constellation class, and 2 frigates are going to be better than 2 cutters. But instead, they decided to go with the national security cutter, which only makes sense to me if you take all the previous requirements that you had and wad them up into a ball and throw them away. Because as I understand, the requirement was they wanted something that could add missile tubes to the fleet, because they know all these Tychos are going away. They wanted to add missile tubes to the fleet. They wanted to do something that had an ability to take the load off the Berks. And I don't see the national security cutter taking the load off Berks on anything except the very, very low end.
My impression is it's coming down to the requirement is to up the number of battle fleet ships. Not whether or not they're effective or not, just get me the hulls in the water so I can say something.
If you're going to do that, just build more LCSs.
Well, that's what they're basically getting.
Yeah. Without the mission bay.
Yeah. So you're getting something that's, boy, isn't that damning? Not quite as good as an LCS.
Yeah. Well, it's a much greater range. But as I think I made the comment to you when we talked beforehand, if you want to increase the range of LCS, just put a container's worth of fuel in that mission bay. I can think of ways you can increase the range of an LCS. And tell them that to never turn on the 3rd turbine or the 4th turbine or whatever turbine it is that they tell them that they're speed limited to 28 knots. So, the question I have with regard to the national security cutter is, the Tychos are going away. Where are you going to get the missile tubes? So, especially since Congress seems to be hard over on the fact that they don't want to let the Tychos go away because they're going to lose missile tubes when they do that. Now, the Tychos were rode hard, put away wet, and that whole design was asked to do things it was never designed to do, which was to hold Aegis in all that superstructure up above. I mean, people talk about the problems of having the aluminum superstructure. What I don't think they understand is that ship is not, oh, we lost Chris. Okay. He's been having connection issues all night. That's why he's been having why his video has not been matching his mouth. So in any event, we've been having, and he's back. Okay. Chris, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. You disappeared. Did you drop off, or did you?
You and I both dropped off.
Huh. Okay. I don't think I ever dropped off. I never dropped off on my side. If somebody in chat wants to tell me whether I'm still on, that would be fantastic. So, okay, Bob says I never dropped off.
You're still on because I've got both up. I think because apparently the parent company of StreamYard put things all together. I think their server is having issues today from what I've been experiencing between Chris, you, and everything.
Okay. Yeah, there was a little bit of a change behind the scenes at StreamYard today. So I was saying that the Spruance class hull, people complain about the aluminum superstructure. The part that I don't think that people fully acknowledge is the fact that that ship is impossible without the aluminum superstructure.
Mm-hmm.
It's top heavy enough as is. and the Spruance class hull was when you turn the Tycho, when you turn the Spruance into the Tycho, that hull was asked to do stuff it was never designed to do. And the end result of that is those ships are really tired. They've got 30-year-old turbines. They've got a lot of gear that would be really expensive to upgrade, and it's not worth upgrading because the hull life isn't there. But Congress doesn't want the VLS tubes to go away. And the last Tycho I saw, which is technically still in the fleet, did not have radars. I don't even think it had masts at this point. I mean, it's clearly just in the reserve. It's still technically in the fleet. It's never going to go to sea again.
I mean, it's worth pointing out, Chris, that to get the steel superstructure, the Burkes are 11 feet wider.
Yeah. They ride nice.
Oh, yeah, they're lovely seagoing ships.
I love Burkes. Tychos are sort of like, you're all over the place on the Tycho.
The sprue cans were kind of like that too, but nowhere near as bad.
Yeah, I never got on board a sprue can. I never got on board a Fig 7. I only worked with Figs a couple of times.
I toured a Fig 7. I never went to sea on one.
So, yeah, I would like to have seen them from the inside. So, okay, let's see. Let's talk about BBGX. So this is the official drawing. Now, I will note, have they fixed it yet? They did fix it. At one point, it said vertical launch missile cells. It claimed there was only 28 VLS, but that should be 128. Note, 128 is not a particularly good number either.
It's only 6 more than a Tycho on a ship 4 times the size.
Yeah, and the only reason it's 6 more in a Tycho is that I think they left the crane in the Tychos.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's not. So this is what it looks like as specified. The design is kind of silly in terms of having port and starboard guns in places where you wouldn't want to have port and starboard guns, like the 5-inch 62s and some other things. So I don't understand why they did that.
It's the Italian influence.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. The Italians do shit like that.
They do. They've got 2 76 millimeter on their friends, forward, side by side.
Yeah,
just like that.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. I think it's crazy, but so that's what the specifications look like. But let's compare it to some other options. Chris already pointed out the tonnage on that, and that's, oh, actually I forgot. We're going to talk about railguns first. Here's a few thoughts that I had about some of the systems on there, like specifically the railgun and the lasers. The lasers are, okay, maybe someday we'll have these lasers. We'll probably have something at some point, but that system doesn't exist yet that's ready to go to sea for any length of time.
Yeah, not at that power level.
Yeah, not at the power level they're talking about. And, it's railguns are a fantastic system in science fiction. They really are. In fact, Perun makes a special point of saying, if you want to defend against the Covenant, you want a railgun. Here on Earth, we got rid of our railgun program. So why did we get rid of our railgun program? Well, to start off with, the USN was looking for 10 shots a minute, and they were getting 4.8.
Mm-hmm.
4.8 is less than 10. Now, 4.8 is still a pretty good rate of fire, but it's not that much better than like a 5-inch gun. So in terms of rate of fire, it's not that impressive. More importantly, they never really solved the rail wear problem, the barrel wear problem. They were getting about 100 shots before they'd have to totally replace that system. That is about a third to a fourth of what a 16-inch gun on the Iowa class got, the barrel liners. You'd have to replace the barrel liners after every 350 shots or so. And if you're wanting to do 10 shots a minute and you're only getting 100 shots out of it, that's only 10 minutes of firing. And even at the rate of 5 shots per minute, that's only 20 minutes of firing. So that's a pretty big, expensive system to only have work for that short a period of time if you think you're going to have to fire that much. More importantly, though, how do you hit something at range? Right? It's a hit to kill system. It's not an explosive system because it's a relatively small projectile, considering it's a kinetic projectile. We can do cheap sensors and cheap GPS chips. We can do those. Can we do a cheap chip that is capable of taking 50,000 Gs? Maybe, probably not.
Yeah.
No. I mean, we don't know that we, as you were pointing out to me earlier, we don't know that we can do one that can take the 50,000 Gs, let alone make it cheap. And what was the cost of the rounds on the 8-inch gun on the Zumwalts?
Oh, it was up to what? Almost $1 million a piece?
Yeah, because it was a very fancy gun and those rounds did very fancy stuff, and they were never going to build enough rounds. They were never going to procure enough rounds to get the price down. And so I can easily see the same thing happen here. So when you start getting to the point where your artillery rounds are as expensive as your missiles, just buy a damn missile. You can, it's a lot more flexible. So at one point, and you know, there's also the general problem of targeting at range, right? It's like, okay, if you're going to shoot something 400 miles, how do you know where the target is? As a general rule, you need to have something pointing to it, and you need to have some sort of seeker once it gets there to go track it down. This is the reason why we got rid of the Tomahawk anti-ship missile, is we just couldn't target it at that range. So they created something called the hypervelocity projectile for the USN gun. They then said, hey, let's use that in powder guns. We can get like 70% of the capability just by firing out of the gun we've already got. And then they went ahead and canceled that too, because they concluded it didn't give them enough bang when it hit. Presumably a railgun round would be going faster and there'd be more kinetic energy behind it. But in general, they've kind of decided that they want something that has an actual explosive in it to go boom, rather than just is moving real fast. So,
yeah, I've always argued that we should adopt the 120 millimeter mortar.
That Swedish thing or Finnish thing.
Amos.
Yeah. I think that thing is fantastic. It doesn't. I mean,
it's a battlefield multitasker. I can hit ground targets. I can take out swarm boats, manned and unmanned, and I can use it to go after submarines. And it's got a low muzzle velocity, but you put a rocket on the rounds and you can get 20, 25 kilometers out of it.
Yeah. And the thing that I like about that thing is it allows a very small ship, because that one YouTube video has like this patrol craft.
It's a speedboat.
It's a speedboat with delusions of grandeur.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's a speedboat that worked out a lot, took all of its vitamins, a little bit bigger than a regular speedboat. But it's like a patrol boat of some sort, and it's got this 120 millimeter weapon on it. And because it's got such a lofted trajectory, it can do very, very interesting time on target attacks where it fires like 5 rounds and they all land at the same time. It can do all sorts of things. It's range limited, but it's low recoil, which means that you can put a pretty big boom on a low recoil system, i.e. something that you can put on a very small vessel.
And
I like that system a lot.
And on a frigate, there's also a variant that is twin barreled.
Yes. And I would do that in a heartbeat over the like 3-inch gun on a Perry.
Oh God, yeah.
In a heartbeat.
The when you talk about the hit to kill thing, what you got to kind of realize is the U.S. gun was a 90 millimeter projectile that weighed between 9 and 10 kilograms. Okay, so you're talking 22 pounds. I understand that kinetic energy is 1/2 mv squared, but m still plays a role here. And if it's that small, and it's useless for anything but attacking a ground target.
So the illustrations I have here are the Japanese railgun,
which is 40 millimeters.
Yeah, it's a lot smaller. So I can't help but think that that thing isn't designed for more of like a missile defense role or something like that.
I don't know what they're trying to do. I mean, they've done shots against a tug. Again, no explosive warhead, which
I'm not sure that they know what they're trying to do with it.
I don't know what they're trying to do either. I think they're just trying to make it work. But, here's the difference between the Japanese and the U.S. The Japanese is a 5 megajoule railgun. That's the amount of energy it consumes. Ours is 32 or, 30 to 32. Okay. 6 times the energy means 40 times the heat generated when you fire this thing.
Yeah. And, I can't help but think that they can get some better barrel life with that much less heat. And so maybe we were just too ambitious. I don't know. The BAE people still seem to think it's the wave of the future. They think the hypervelocity projectile is the wave of the future. They're still all in on all that stuff. But the lesson I take away from all this is that it's a reminder that that a lot of things that we decide that we can do, we decide that we shouldn't do. Because it isn't just, can we do this? The question is, okay, we're trying to accomplish something. Is this the best way to accomplish that? And frequently with something like a railgun, you get to the point where you add up all the different costs associated with it. You kind of go, now I'm in the territory where I might as well just use a missile. A railgun only makes sense if it's cheap. Otherwise, I can use a missile and I can get more range and I can get as much velocity and I can have a targeting seeker. I can all sorts of things. So if a missile works better and is cheaper, then I should just use a missile. So, okay. So here's a comparison. So I just sort of pulled some of the numbers, threw it up against some alternatives. So I picked the middle of the cost range for the BBGX. They say 5 to 15 billion. For what it's worth, I think 15 billion is probably optimistic.
Closer, yeah.
I think it's kind of optimistic. The 3 Flight 3 Berks cost you just under 7 billion. And for purposes of this exercise, I created something that I'm calling a strike destroyer, a DDS. And a DDS is a Burke hull with a railgun and 12 CPS cells, 12 conventional prompt strike missile cells. Has this actually been proposed by anybody except me? No. It is a thought experiment for purposes of this discussion, and I am assuming that you could do all that for $2.6 billion because if you pulled out all the VLS cells, you've got a lot of space to work with and probably pull out the 5-inch gun. Maybe it may or may not have that 5-inch gun in there also. You've got a lot of space to work with, and I'm just going to, for purposes of this, I'm going to assert that we can do this for 2.6 billion because the hull and the power supply problem is just more of something that we already have. We just would have to add more to get the number of megajoules we need. Okay, so assuming it is 2.6 billion, you could have 2 Burks plus the strike destroyer for 7 billion. Okay, so there are cheaper alternatives. From a tonnage standpoint, it works out to 35,000 tons is about what they're talking about for the BBGX. That's more than 3 Flight 3 Burks. Try saying that 5 times fast. More than 2 Burks and 1 strike destroyer. But the main difference between the two is I can build the Burks in a lot of different shipyards that I can't build this BBGX in. Basically, any shipyard I can build that BBGX in is going to be a shipyard I can build a carrier in. So this is kind of implying that I'm going to clobber one of the shipyards that's doing a carrier.
Well, right now there's only one shipyard really building carriers. That's Newport News.
There's other shipyards that are refurbishing carriers.
Well, they're doing that too. But see, building in a graving dock is different than maintaining in a dry dock.
True.
And the other HII yard in Pascagoula has a graving dock that could take a 40,000 ton ship. So maybe you could build it there.
Okay.
But the bottom line is to get the production rate that they're talking about, you'd have to use both shipyards.
Yes. They're talking about building like 25 of these things.
Yes.
Which is insane.
In their dreams.
And it's especially insane because they only have 128 VLS tubes. It's a Tycho.
That makes no sense to me.
It's a Tycho. And in a world where we need VLS cells, I mean, if we're going to build 25, that says that we're going to replace a 10,000 ton Tycho with a 35,000 ton BBGX. That's it's effectively a 1-for-1 replacement on the Tychos. Okay, sure. Conventional prompt strike missiles, the strike destroyer thing idea I came up with, it would have those, but the 3 Flight 3 Burks don't have that. Doesn't have a railgun either. I did a little points calculation based upon what Perun did in his video, where every one of those conventional prompt strike missile cells I counted as being equivalent to 4 VLSs. If you do a points calculation that way, any of the other options have more capability on a missile carrying basis than the BBGX does.
Do you happen to know what the warhead on a conventional prompt strike missile is?
I can't remember.
Because it seems to me that's a moving target.
It is. And the thing is,
what you get down to is this. I don't think a conventional prompt strike is going to be 4 times the effectiveness of one VLS cell. If you consider a Tomahawk as the strike missile.
I don't think it's going to be 4 times the effectiveness either.
If you get 2, I'll be surprised.
You can maybe argue that part of the effectiveness isn't necessarily the size of the boom, but the fact that it can respond so quickly, and as a result, it's going to get targets that the other missiles wouldn't get. I have problems with that argument for reasons that I don't want to go into. Mm-hmm. In part because in the last job, we played various hypersonic missiles in various war games and stuff like that. And to be honest, it's also jumbled up in my head that I can't remember what's one versus another, et cetera, et cetera. And some of it has some of the details have not been made public on some of that stuff. Yeah. So I don't want to go down that path.
However, just the thing is that just about any ballistic missile is hypersonic.
Yes. Yeah, and at some level, I sort of look at this and go like, Pershing 2.
Which is hypersonic until it tries to home.
Yeah, but that's good enough in most cases.
I'm not disagreeing.
So, and one of the things that it doesn't talk about is sonars. Let's assume it's got a towed array sonar and it's got an active sonar on it. Well, it's got one of each, whereas 3 Burks have 3 of each. And this other one, I'm making the assumption it's also got sonar stuff, right? So it's got a lot less ASW capability. So I kind of look at this and I go like, this seems like a really inefficient way to spend your tonnage. Maybe it has a crew savings. In fact, I think it does actually have a crew savings. And that's worth something, but I don't think it's worth this. I don't think the crew savings is worth $10 billion.
I don't think the crew savings are going to be real.
I don't either.
Because you have so much more equipment that's going to require some maintenance. You can't thin the crew down too much or you end up back in the LCS bin.
Yeah, I think the crew is bigger. The crew is bigger, so they're not assuming that the crew would be smaller. But I wonder how much of that, they keep talking about command staff and stuff like that, and it's like, okay, how much they don't understand the difference between crew and the tenants on board. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder about how much of that is really the tenants on board. The they, I mean, is the administration people, not the Navy. The Navy understands that. Yeah, and so that number is in some ways questionable, although, okay, do I need that many more engineering guys? The plant's going to be a little bit bigger, but not necessarily super duper much bigger.
Oh, no. You're talking a rail gun.
Oh, that thing is going to require 100 people.
And you got to generate the electrons. Oh no.
Yeah.
The engineering section is much larger.
That's a good point. We got to generate the electrons. It's not just about making the ship move through the water. It's generating the electrons. Okay. Yeah, you've convinced me. The Manning numbers are probably whacked. But I do wonder if you're talking about you want to build something fancy and new, and I just wanted to include this because, I've been a big fan of this concept and I only recently found the document. Why not build this thing? So this is one of the proposals, as Chris knows, because I found this document and sent it off to him. This is one of the proposals from the original 1989 Arleigh Burke Flight 3 proposal. So Arleigh Burke, the Flight 1s were in the water. I'm not even sure the Flight 2s were in the water yet, let alone, and this was deemed to be too expensive and they did the 2A instead. But there's a couple of things that are worth noting about this thing. First of all, it's a lot bigger. It's 40 feet longer. It has 32 more VLS cells, which would take it to either 120 or 128. What's the discrepancy between? Actually, that's not right. It should be 122 or 128. Mm-hmm. The discrepancy is whether you take the crane out or not. They later took the crane out for the new builds, and so they don't have the crane in the missile farm. They had a crane forward and a crane aft. And so that's the difference there between 122 and 128 as to whether you have that crane or not. I'll note 128, same missile loadout as this BBGX thing. And it's a flat deck, a flush deck. It doesn't have that drop down at the end. And as you can see, they've moved the flight deck forward of the aft missile farm, which, if you look at the Tychos, the flight deck is forward. And that I'm told, has some advantages. If you're a helo pilot trying to land in rough seas, you'd rather be landing towards the middle of the ship because that's where the pivot point is. And so one of the restrictions on the Burke, one of the things about the Burke that is not something in its favor is the fact that the helo deck is so far aft. And also the fact that it's lower like that means that there's sometimes issues with landing on that thing. And so this would make that a little bit better. So there's a lot of things we don't know. They did not release a speed. I'm sure they did a calculation. They didn't release it. There was a bunch of details about exactly what it would be. This is now a 35-year-old design, and it was not a completed design. It was really kind of a design study. The only reason we know about it is that the guys who did this went and talked at a society. What's name stand for?
Society of Naval Architects and Marine Engineers.
Yeah, so they went to like a local Virginia chapter and gave a presentation, and they wrote up a paper, and that paper is available online. And I finally found it. And this is just one of the other options. They looked at a bunch of different ways to do it, but this is the one I kind of like the best. So alternatively, if you really want missile cells, you could always go back to the Arsenal ship. And I particularly like this model. It's one of the earlier Lockheed Martin models on the Arsenal ship. I think that is a very, very sweet looking ship. I really like that. Don't know what those missile boxes are. Don't know what the caliber of that gun is.
I think it was supposed to be 8-inch, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was this part of that 8-inch gun thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which they had a prototype gun, and then they got rid of the prototype gun, and I think they even got rid of the plans. So, like, I know they like people talk about that gun, but like that gun doesn't exist. That gun would have to be redeveloped, is my understanding, which is just dumb. But I counted up it appears to be the case that this thing is 522 VLS cells. And boy, I just have typos all over today. That should be tonnage, unknown tonnage. This is what happens when I don't go back and reread the slides before I declare victory. And if I were going to do this, if I wanted to turn this into a BBGX, I think what I'd do is I move those aft missile launchers, assuming I kept them, I'd move them aft to where the flight deck is. I would slide the entire missile farm aft. I would put some helicopter hangars at the bases of the superstructure, and I'd have the helo pad be right behind the superstructure for the same reason I was talking about on the last slide. To move that helo landing area closer to the center of the ship. But this is an early Lockheed Martin model. The only reason we know of its existence is that there was a guy at Lockheed Martin who somebody brought that model back in. It had been one that they were taking off to trade shows, but it was no longer their current design. And so they turned the model back in. He's got no idea who the model maker was. It was a one-off. It ended up in his office, and he took pictures of it and posted them online. But I like it. I like it a lot. So, you there, Chris?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, wasn't sure. You weren't moving.
Sorry.
I thought you'd frozen again. I thought your router had died.
Yeah.
So okay, so that's where I think that's the last slide. Oh no, this is what the administration is going to do next. They're going to start designing tanks for the Army.
God, does that look Russian?
So the story behind this is some model maker invented this tank and did this kit bash and submitted it to a contest and wrote up a fake history for it all. The claim is that the Russians put this together in like 1941 or something like that, when it was just a model contest thing. And it's gone out online and people think it was an actual Russian design.
It's a big Russian tank.
Now, I'll note, the Russians did other things that were pretty much just as bad. Pretty much just as bad. The only thing that makes this stand out as being super duper bad is how long it is and how impossible it would be to turn that thing. But the Russians at one point did a tank that had like 10 crewmen and 5 turrets. It was insane. And paradoxically, that tank ended up fighting against the Russians because the Russians threw it into the defense during Barbarossa. The Germans managed to capture the damn thing and said, wow, this thing's weird. Let's take it back and put it in a museum in Berlin. Fast forward 4 years, and suddenly that tank in the museum in Berlin is a valuable national resource in the defense of Berlin. And so the Russians found themselves fighting their own tank monstrosity. And I can't remember what the damn thing is called. Although I've played a war game with it in the not too distant past.
Ogre?
So it does kind of look like an ogre. Okay, so I think the right answer at this point is, let me go through the questions real quick and see if there's anything that strikes me as something we need to talk about. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Bob. Good evening, Wright. Good evening, Delon. Good evening, Claude. Good, Dustin, One Horse Shay, et cetera, et cetera. So Dustin asked the question, why does the Sovereign, or why does the Akira class look like it's a ship between the Galaxy family and the Sovereign class? Well, because it is. I mean, just from a timing perspective, it really kind of is. And I think the Sovereign class was built with an idea that they needed to build warships, and there were some reasons why you would build the Sovereign classes, you know, that it was built as a warship. And I think the Akira class, it may not have started as a warship, but by the time that design got into the fleet, it was definitely a warship. So, okay, let's see. Okay. Yeah, Dustin points out that official canon in all the different games classify the Akira in different ways. Which is, yeah, that's part of it, is there really isn't a canon system for how you do this stuff, and the games certainly don't have to follow it. Yeah, Wright points out the Flight 2A and the Flight 3 are pretty much cruisers. I always say that what I would do is I'd build that one that I showed, which is 40 feet longer. It's like 11,000 tons, and I just call it the Halsey class cruiser to differentiate it.
Even if you go with the Gints, the 2A is still technically within the upper bounds of a destroyer.
Yeah.
The Flight 3s will not be. They'll exceed it.
Although the funny thing is the Flight 3 and the Flight 2A are like the same length. They're both 509 feet long versus 505 for the shorter ships. I mean, that's the thing, that's one of the reasons why I don't understand why they didn't go back to that older design. They talk about how the Flight 3, about how the Burke has no margin left.
No.
Well, okay, yeah, if you don't make it any longer, it's got no margin left.
Not disagreeing. I mean, and what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of that margin got sucked up by cooling to support the SPAAACE radar.
That doesn't surprise me. Radars are power intensive.
Well, AESA radars are very power intensive and they generate a lot of heat.
Yeah, and if you've added missile defense to the list of things that you want to be able to accomplish, you're adding radar power. So Patrick Ross says, I recall Dirk Kennefeld mentioning in World War II, the U.S. Navy lumped frigates, sloops, and corvettes together as destroyer escorts. So that all makes sense to me. Because they use the destroyer escorts differently than they did destroyers, is the short answer to that question.
They were dedicated convoy escorts.
Yeah, and what does dedicated convoy escort mean in this case? It means that they did not have some of the capabilities that they thought were essential to be part of the battle line or the battle group, right? They weren't designed to go off and do attacks against enemy battleships, et cetera, et cetera. They did not have that kind of offensive role. What they had was a defensive role against submarines.
I'm going to do a quick check here because I have a book that will tell us this.
Okay, he's going to go look for that. So at the Naval War College in McCarty Little Hall, in the lobby of McCarty Little Hall, they had these nice, like 5-foot long models. And they had a 5-foot long model of a World War II destroyer and a 5-foot long model of a World War II destroyer escort, or they were the same scale, so they weren't quite the same size. The destroyer escort was a little smaller. One of the things that I noticed about that, and this is really the first place where I really kind of understood what the difference between a destroyer escort and a destroyer was. A destroyer has a gun director, which is a separate turret that has the binocular gun rangefinders on it. And it looks like a gun turret, except it doesn't have a gun. And battleships have these and cruisers have these, et cetera, et cetera. If you look for these things, you can find them. Frequently, they have radars on top because it's the surface search radar, or it's the surface targeting radar to get the range for the guns. And so a destroyer has one of these gun director turrets. A destroyer escort does not, which means that the destroyer escorts have less capability to use their guns in that situation, right? They're a little bit more restricted in what they can do. A destroyer escort was intended as a cheaper alternative. And when you got into corvettes and sloops and stuff, a lot of those things were slower too. Frigates are a weird situation because frigate was a term that had basically fallen out of use in the late 1800s. You know, warrior was a frigate, but shortly thereafter, there were no more frigates being made. Frigate was a term that had fallen out of use. And there were periodic times when the world's navies would say, we got this name, this type just sort of laying around not being used. Maybe we should use it. In World War II, I forget who did what. Like, I think we used frigate, but what we called a frigate was not what the Brits used the term sloop for the same thing.
They had both sloops. They had corvettes because that was the flowers.
Yeah.
And then they had frigates, rivers, castles.
Did we not have frigates on?
We did not have frigates.
Okay.
That's kind of what Drock was going into. Anyway, I pulled up this lovely book. And there is only DEs. There are 6 types, and they vary by design group, and they're all about 1.4 to 1,400 to 1,800 tons. They're also slow. They could never stay with a carrier group. I mean, the fastest version was 20 knots.
Yeah.
So, and if you look at things like the Flower class corvette, it's relatively small. It's slow. It does one thing only.
Yes.
ASW. If you look at the frigates, it really did one thing only. ASW. The U.S. Navy just said, we'll just call all that DEs and be done with it.
Makes sense. Oh, by the way, I just realized I never put into the chat the link to the Armchair Dragoons announcement. So I just put that in the chat. So if anybody wants to go and register for the conference, they can do that.
Now, here's a little history for you, Chris.
Okay.
Up until 1991, I believe it was, 1990, who actually published the Ginst?
This is a trick question.
Think about your discussion about name changes. This was the Scientific and Technical Intelligence Directorate, DT, back in those days. And DT2C was the Navy branch. My office wrote the Ginst.
Oh, so DIA used to do it.
Yes. And the author of the last two was a Dr. Jeffrey Fenton.
Okay. A name I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
Name I've heard. And then it went to O&I.
Actually,
Yeah.
O&I really hasn't done it. It's been coming out as a Navy instruction. So I don't know if O&I is writing it and it's just coming out, but it's coming out as a Navy instruction.
Huh. Okay, I didn't remember that, but those are. I will go back to the Weuve Strategic Book and Game Reserve located in Beaver Valley Self Storage in Beaver Creek, Ohio, and go to the parts of my brain that I keep stored there and see if those parts of my brain remember that.
The last one I have from O&I did publish it in 2018. Before that, it was coming out in. Yeah, and yes, I have copies of all these.
I should, if you've got them electronically, I should get them.
Yeah, I should probably send them to you.
I've got one in from the 1970s or something like that. Let's see. Yeah, One Horse Shape points out that this is worth pointing out. That Starfleet has this interesting problem in that their ships never go away. Right. And, we all know that the reason why that we see Mirandas and Excelsiors is that they had a shit ton of Miranda and Excelsior models laying around. And so it was always easy to grab a Miranda model and use it in the show. And it really had more to do with the special effects department. But, as I've said multiple times, I can tell you a story as to why it would make sense that there would still be Mirandas and Excelsiors in the fleet, 100 years after that ship first came out. Or 70 or whatever it is. But that being the case, this leads to a very interesting thing. Are you constantly changing your classification scheme? I would argue you probably are, in that there's probably some part of that scheme that tells you whether the ship, what its basic job was. And then there's probably something that tells you whether it's still capable of doing that job or not. And when you've got a small number of ships, you can just kind of know, right? You can just kind of know that, was it Utah that was the training battleship that was just there? One of the battleships sunk at Pearl Harbor, all it did was train anti-aircraft gunners. It wasn't actually a functional.
No, Utah target. Yeah,
I'm sorry,
Utah
what?
was a target ship.
Yeah,
Utah was a target ship.
Utah was a target ship. It just pulled targets. So, and everybody knew that this wasn't a ship that was going to go to sea and fight a war.
And the Japanese pilots were told, don't attack it. But in the heat of the moment, if it looks like a battleship, it's a battleship.
Yes, yes. So that it is an interesting question about if your ships are going to be around forever and ever, how do you keep all that stuff straight? Okay. Yeah, and the Constitution itself is, we don't even have, I think, an official name of what the refit Enterprise was. It's been called a Constitution 2. It's been called an Enterprise class. I don't even think we have anything authoritative that says exactly what that thing was. So Wright says, wouldn't it be great if we could build new Perry class FFGs with VLS instead of the Mark 13 one-armed bandit? Probably, yeah. I don't think that ship was deep enough to take a strike length weapon, and as I think it was only deep enough to take an SM2 standard range, not the extended range one.
Yeah,
so
the MRs.
So it could only do sort of short to medium range air defense, which means it's not really adding a whole lot of tubes to the fleet, useful tubes to the fleet. I mean, it can protect itself. I don't want to make it sound like protecting itself is, any ship that can protect itself is a ship that doesn't need as much of an escort, but it's not doing area air defense. It's not contributing to the area air defense solution with those.
I'm going to push back on that because
Okay.
the SM2 MRs now go a hell of a lot further, well past what we consider point defense. I mean, they can get out to 40 miles, 50 miles.
Okay. Fair enough.
They can now. When you think about, well, how many channels did a Perry have? 2.
Yeah.
So a VLS makes no sense on a Perry unless you're going to add more directors, more powerful radars, in which case the hull cannot take it.
Yeah.
Now, HII, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, they have all come out with patrol frigates, a lot bigger than a Perry, but patrol frigates with mini Aegis, the small, the F variant, and between 24 and 32 VLS cells to include strike. There would be some strike modules. Not all of them could be strike, but they've been pandering these at Sierra and Space for decades now.
Yeah, and maybe we should be building one.
I got a whole bunch of brochures I could break out.
The patrol frigate is an interesting term because, of course, patrol frigate was a term that was just coming into vogue about the time that they did the 1975 transfiguration of the classification system. And originally, I believe isn't that what they were going to call the Perrys?
Yes.
And then they dropped the patrol. And I think that before that, patrol frigate had been something that was like Corvette sized.
It was close in size because
Yeah.
it was built around the Mark 13 launcher, and that has some constraints.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you want to talk about using current typing, this National Security Cutter frigate, it's an OPV. It's a patrol vessel.
Yeah.
Overseas patrol vessel.
There are no rules anymore.
Or there are no rules that can't be ignored.
Yeah, my favorite example of that is the Seawolf class. 3 ships in the class: Seawolf, Connecticut, and Jimmy Carter. As near as I can tell, the only common element in those 3 names is that they all have an E in them. Okay. So Wright said something about, I had thought that as the Columbia class SSBNs come online, basically that the first 4 Ohios would be decommissioned, and then like you'd take another 4 Ohios and turn them into SSGNs. I'm not sure the hulls have the whole life left.
No. The replacements for the Ohio SSGNs is Virginia Block 5 with the 4 Virginia payload tubes, the midships, which gives you 42 total cells. Six big tubes, 7 Tomahawks apiece. That's the replacement.
I'm not sure that you could use those Ohios as a replacement.
No, they don't have the life left in them worthwhile to do this.
Yeah, whole life and probably also reactor life.
Well, if you're going to do it, you'd recore them. It's really, it's everything else is just too freaking old.
Yeah, it's been, yeah. I mean, shit wears out.
I mean, when we did the initial study, which I participated in this study, when they were looking at making the SSGNs, and DOD gave it a remarkably interesting name. It was called the Marginal Utility Study. Do we get enough benefit to put the amount of money which was poured into those 4 ships to reconfigure them for SOF and a whole bucket of Tomahawks?
And remember why those ships became available to begin with? Well,
we were downsizing ballistic missile boats, or looking to.
Yeah, but why?
Start.
This was a treaty thing. We had to get rid of the submarines.
But here's
they had life left in them, so let's do something useful with them.
But here's the funky thing. If you read the START treaty, we did not do what we needed to do to not count those tubes.
Really?
Yeah. Those tubes are, pardon the pun, hard welded to the hull. You have to take the tubes out to have them not count.
Interesting. I hadn't gone and read that. Okay, I'm still scrolling. Why not make a missile ship the size of the Gerald Ford class? Because that would be insanely expensive.
Shoot, making it as big as they're talking about will be insanely expensive.
Yeah. I mean, you could. You're putting all your eggs in one basket, which aircraft carriers already have that problem. That was the other thing with the Arsenal ship. They were talking about putting 600 tubes on one hull. It's like, do we have 600 missiles?
That's always been the big deal. Since missile procurement is separate from the hull, would we ever build enough missiles to fill every hole? Because I know in the 90s and early 2000s, they were cross-decking weapons on patrollers.
Yeah.
People deploying. We didn't have enough.
Yeah, and so that's actually one of the things that I would say to Congress with Congress's obsession with keeping tubes in the fleet. It's like, have you counted the number of weapons? Are all those tubes full? I don't know. But if you told me that a bunch of those tubes are empty, I wouldn't have a hard time believing it. So you got to buy the stuff to begin with. And when you add in the cost of all the weapons to go along with it, if you figure that filling a tube is $1 million, it might be a little bit less. It's just as likely to be 1.5, probably. But if you figure on average $1 million per tube, That's, $128 million for a Tycho.
122.
122 because they still have the cranes.
Yep.
Wright says it would be fun to get Perun on the show sometime. I have been meaning to reach out to Perun. Perun is my hero. If I ever get around to doing what the second channel, which I want to do, which is the fleet operations channel, I'm going to basically do it just like Perun does. You'll never see me. You'll just see the slides. So Wright points out that there's some slipways that still exist. They're just not active shipyards right now. That in theory we could build a shipyard there.
But reconstituting a shipyard, okay, this is not a light switch.
No, it's not a light switch. But on the other hand, it is waterfront with the required depth.
It is waterfront with the required depth, but the cost to rebuild the building infrastructure would scare anybody from thinking about it.
Would it be any worse than building new?
I don't know. I mean, you'd have to go and see if those graving docks, they're still existing, but can they take the load?
Yeah.
And if they can't, then what's the point?
So Dustin says, what would happen if you added 4 more decks to the main shuttle bay of a Galaxy class? How many Defiant class ships could fit in the saucer? That's a really good question, and it's impossible to answer because there is no Defiant class. There's about 12 Defiant classes, depending upon how big they wanted the ship to be that week.
Yep.
And so just like the White Star in Babylon 5, the Defiant started off really small, and by the end of the show, it was huge.
Oh, yeah.
And it was kind of crazy. And never seemed to be consistent. White Stars especially were that case. They started off small and they were huge by the end. Okay. Dustin says Enterprise CVN 80 should be setting speed records soonish. I'm not sure about that. The original Enterprise was the argument is the original Enterprise was the fastest surface ship in the fleet the day she was commissioned, and she was the fastest surface ship in the fleet the day that she was decommissioned. And that's because she had a very, very fine hull. That was a ship that was designed for speed. The later carriers have not been designed for speed. They've been designed for storage volume. They've been volumetrically in the whole form is that of a freighter because they're trying to cram lots of stuff inside, including lots and lots of aviation fuel. And as a result of that, they've just never had the Greyhound-like physique that the Enterprise did.
I mean, they're still calling for, the Fords to be, 33, 34 knots?
Something like that.
But if they go that fast, they are leaving their escorts behind.
Yeah. Yeah. And occasionally they do that. Carriers have been known to do that.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, when evading a torpedo. Sorry, guys, you're on your own. Actually, if they're evading a torpedo, one of the escorts is charging the torpedo.
Yeah, getting into the wake.
Yeah. Okay. Still scrolling.
Oh dear.
So it's funny that you say that because we actually in the Peter Hamilton Night's Dawn universe, they literally grow space colonies and they start out small and they feed them asteroids and they get bigger. And then eventually the colony gets big enough, it reaches in its adult size, and then they go inside and install all the people stuff inside the colony. I love that series. I love everything about that series except the main core of the plot. So yeah, we are just about done. Once again, the hour-long shows lasted an hour and 45 minutes. And we are done. Okay, so, Chris, any final thoughts?
Type as you wish.
Yes, type as you wish. If you are trying to create something, do not let the conventions of the past hold you back. In fact, I would encourage you to come up with a system that makes sense. Part of the making sense may be the Treaty of Aldebaran said, thou shalt call, this type of ship Fred. That's okay. Don't think that you should just slavishly copy World War II or modern or anything else like that, because those systems aren't consistent, right?
And that's the big deal. If you make up a system, please stay with it. Otherwise, your fans are going to come and hunt you till you die.
Or have an excuse as to why it isn't. But your system shouldn't be inconsistent because you stole from a system that's inconsistent.
Really?
Right? It should be inconsistent for its own reasons. It's okay to be sort of totally arbitrary about stuff like that, but you shouldn't just copy somebody else's arbitrariness. And there's plenty of arbitrariness to go around. So, okay, with that in mind, I think it is time to call it. So remember, everybody, if you want to see the AC/DC, no show next week, because I will be, at this time, I will be in Frostburg, Maryland at a party. And then the following week, I'll be doing the show that's also part of the AC/DC. If you want to be part of the AC/DC, go to the link that I posted. Thank you once again, Chris, for joining me. And as always, I continue to be stunned that this many people are willing to spend their Saturday night listening to me and whoever I have come on with me talk about this stuff. But I really do appreciate that. And so thank you very much, everybody. And we'll see you next time.